Question number 5, James Shaw.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister of Finance and reads, what specific steps will he take to minimise the economic effect from billions of dollars of bank profits being taken out of New Zealand by overseas-owned banks?
The Honourable Bill English.
Mr Speaker, the government is focused on reducing New Zealand's obligations to the rest of the world. We've made some progress on this measure. The net international investment position is now 62% of GDP compared to minus 84% of GDP in early 2009, the lowest it's been since 1991. The government has taken the specific steps of limiting spending increases and moving to get on top of debt. And households have had positive net savings each year for the last 5 years, the first time this has happened since the early 1990s. Of course, where profits are legally made by overseas banks, then we don't take specific action to take their profits off them other than to tax them. Reserve Bank data shows that banks paid almost $2 billion in income tax in the year to June 2015, so that part of their profits was specifically not repatriated because of government action.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, James Shaw.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. To the Minister, would the Minister like to see more money staying in New Zealand, or is he okay with banks sending overseas the equivalent of almost $1,000 for every New Zealander?
The Honourable Bill English.
Well, as I point out to the member, they get to repatriate about whatever's left over after they pay their tax. And as I pointed out, last year they paid $2 billion in tax. We're satisfied New Zealand is making progress on gradually reducing its obligations to foreigners. And that's expressed through the measures that I pointed out before. Individual New Zealanders, of course, have the choice of banks that they use, and should they use New Zealand-owned banks, then those profits are probably more likely to stay in New Zealand.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, James Shaw.
Is he satisfied that the Reserve Bank is adequately fulfilling its responsibility under Part 5 of the Reserve Bank Act to ensure that the banking system is efficient, given the sector's record billion-dollar profits?
The Honourable Bill English.
Well, Mr Speaker, I am pretty sure the Reserve Bank, in fact, I believe the Reserve Bank is fulfilling its obligations, which are fundamentally to have a stable banking system. And if there's one thing we've learned in the last 7 or 8 years, it's that one thing worse than profitable banks, unprofitable banks, because that has dragged down economies ranging from the US through to Ireland and Iceland. The Commerce Commission plays a role in assessing the competitiveness of our banking sector, and in a number of reviews over the years, it's indicated that, in their view, the banking sector is competitive, and New Zealanders, of course, can vote with their feet. They can remove their business from banks they believe are making excessive profits, if overseas banks, and join New Zealand-owned banks, of which there are a number who are quite successful.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, James Shaw.
Does he accept that bank profitability has nothing to do with the stability of the banking industry that he was just referring to, given that Lehman Brothers, Merrill Lynch and Bear Stearns were all highly profitable in the years running up to their spectacular collapse?
The Honourable Bill English.
Well, Mr Speaker, they were different sorts of banks, that's for sure, than the big banks here in New Zealand. They also tended to make their profits by taking considerable risk, for instance, trading in derivatives, which our banks simply don't do beyond the absolute necessity to maintain their deposit holding and lending functions. So, Mr Speaker, and it's better to have strong banks. You can't have a strong bank that doesn't make any money. These ones make profits under competitive conditions, and as I said, New Zealanders who think those profits are excessive can take their business elsewhere.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, James Shaw.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. When farmers are struggling to meet their loan repayments and families in Auckland are being saddled with huge mortgages just to buy their first home, does he think it's appropriate that the major foreign-owned banks are all making record profits?
The Honourable Bill English.
Well, Mr Speaker, in both the cases of the farmers and the Auckland homeowners, it's willing buyer, willing sellers. We might have a view about the conditions that lead to high prices for farmland or housing, but they are choices made by sensible New Zealanders who understand the obligations that they're entering into. There are, in fact, a whole lot of profitable businesses. In fact, if the businesses weren't profitable, the banks wouldn't be able to make profits either. And if households weren't able to meet their obligations, the banks would not be able to continue to function as businesses. So the member's putting forward an unrealistic choice.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, James Shaw.
Will his government take action to keep more cash in the New Zealand economy and drive efficiency across the banking sector by investing in Kiwibank to compete properly with the big Australian banks?
The Honourable Bill English.
Well, Mr Speaker, the best thing New Zealanders can do to enable Kiwibank to compete more with the big Australian banks is to sign up with Kiwibank. In the end, that's what will make the most difference. The constraint on that bank is simply its ability to get customers. But of course, New Zealanders can also join the TSB or my favourite bank, that is SBS Bank, based on the Southland Building Society.
SOS.
Question number 6, Grant Robertson.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My